Okay, there we go. All right, so good morning, and thank you, everybody, for coming out today. I know after Yontif, we're all a little exhausted. It's hard to get ourselves out of bed, but we're all still working off of the high of Rosh Hashanah and the anticipation towards Yom Kippur. So hopefully this is keeping us on that path. So our topic this morning is going to be the Akedah Yitzhak. Yesterday, we read it not yesterday, Friday. It's hard to keep the days straight. The second day of Rosh Hashanah, it was the Torah reading for the day. And we know in the concluding part of the Zichronot section of the Musaf, it also concludes with the story of the Akedah. So it plays in very prominently into the theme of Rosh Hashanah. And beyond the theme of Rosh Hashanah, it's really something that's included in the Siddur. I think a lot of us probably skip over it in the morning davening, but the whole story of the Akedah is there in the Siddur, in between the Brachot section and the Psukei de Zimra. We read those psukim, and the whole story of the Akedah is recounted to us on a daily basis. So the question really is, what is so significant about that? Why is that story so powerful? That it takes up a good part of the theme of Rosh Hashanah, and even on a daily basis, it's something that we're supposed to keep in mind and remember and live by the lesson. So I think we can all kind of come up with a basic answer. Obviously, the commitment of Abraham to Hashem, that he was willing to sacrifice his son. But I'd really like to explore it a little more in depth and see if we can come away with even some deeper answers as far as what is the meaning of the Akedah. So if you look at the sheet that I gave you, just at the first few psukim from the story. Source number 1 says, "Vayhi achar hadvarim ha'ila, Elokim nisa et Abraham, vayomer elav Abraham, vayomer hineni." So sometime afterward, which literally means after these things, Hashem tested Abraham, and he said to Abraham, and Abraham answered, "Here I am, hineni." So the first issue that's bothersome here is the idea of, it starts off by "Vayhi achar hadvarim ha'ila." That's kind of superfluous to say after these things. Right? In general, we know the Torah does go in chronological order. Even though we have this theme of Ein Mukdam U'Meuchar B'Torah, sometimes events are switched around in chronological order to teach us a certain lesson or to make a certain connection between events. In general, the Torah goes pretty much in order of how things happen. So why does it need to say that? Of course, it would be the next thing that happened. So that's really bothersome to many of the commentaries. Rashi finds it so difficult to read it after these events that he actually reads it after these words. Dvarim can come from the word davar, it could be a word, not just a thing or an event that happened. So Rashi brings down a couple of midrashim. One is that the Satan himself came to God and complained and said, you make such a simcha about this Abraham character, but he just made this whole celebration about the birth of his son Yitzhak, and he didn't even offer a korban there. Right? So, how dedicated is he really to you? It's almost an echo of the story of Iyun, where Iyun was this wonderful, humble, good person, and the Satan comes and complains to God, everything is good for him, but if everything wasn't so good for him, maybe he wouldn't be such a tzaddik, maybe he wouldn't be such a righteous man. So Rashi is bringing down this measure to suggest that maybe it was the words of the Satan that inspired Hashem to make Abraham bring his son as a korban. The other suggestion that Rashi says is perhaps it was the words of Ishmael. And here, because we know there were two partners in the korban, there was Abraham, and then there was also Yitzhak. Yitzhak was not a little boy at the time, he was a grown man at the time, so he had to willingly go along as well. So Rashi says that perhaps it was the words of Ishmael, who said, everyone makes Yitzhak to be this wonder child and, the miracle baby, but, he got a bris at 8 days old. I got one at 13 years, right? Who's more committed in terms of signing on to this covenant? And so, perhaps, as a challenge to Yitzhak's faith, and to prove that he also was committed to Hashem, just like Ishmael was, so Hashem offered the opportunity for the Akedah. Yor Chaim has a little bit of a different spin on it, on Vayhi Achar HaDvarim Ha'ila. He wants to say it's not just the specific event that preceded it, but all of the events leading up to the Akedah. Because if you think about it, how old was Abraham when he had this child? 100 years old, right? Sarah was also way past the age of having children. And they waited so long for this child, and the whole hopes and anticipations and dreams of this legacy that they were created were all hinged on this child. And then they watched him grow up, and she weaned him, and they made this party for him. Right after all of these events that led to that point, that's when the Akedah happened. So what's the point? What is the Or Chaim trying to teach us? It's trying to highlight for us the level of sacrifice that was being asked of Abraham. It wasn't just like one child and he had many child, so maybe it wasn't that big a deal to give one up. But it was this child that he waited for and he longed for, and there was a process for him coming, and there was promises about his birth, and the angels came coming to announce it. Right? It was just so many events that led up to it to sort of underscore how challenging the request that God was making of Abraham was. A third opinion of Achar Hadavarim Ha'ila. So it could be referring to the Haftorah that we read the first day of Rosh Hashanah. That was the story of the birth of Ishmael, right? So what happened there? Sarah recognized that Ishmael was a very negative influence over Yitzchak, whether it was a physical influence, that he was threatening him physically, or if it was a spiritual influence, she just didn't like the lifestyle that he was leading and didn't want that to rub off on her son Yitzchak. And she, demanded that Avram send Ishmael away. And people, the rumors were, they didn't understand Sarah's sincerity, right? What it looked like from the outside was here Sarah had this rival wife, and who gave birth before she was able to have children. She must have been jealous of her, right? So what's the best way to deal with the jealousy is kick her out of the house, send her away, right? And so even when Abraham conceded and gave in, we know that Abraham conceded and gave in because Hashem said to him, listen to Sarah, she's right? Everything your wife tells you, listen to her. It's great advice for Abraham and for everybody. But in that case, everybody else looking in, it just looked like, yeah, sure, Abraham was just, giving it to his wife, who was jealous of the other woman in the household and the mother of his child. But now, when Abraham is asked to give up the son of Sarah, right, the son that he waited for all these years, the Ben Zekunim that he had, so now already that makes a different statement. Oh, well, maybe they can look back at his giving up Ishmael and saying, well, if he's willing to give this one up for God, maybe that one was also because of the word of God. So this approach is trying to look at it as a way of sort of exonerating what Abraham had done by sort of exonerating a previous event and saying that Abraham really was sincere. Just as he was sincere by giving up Yitzchak, he was also sincere by sending away Ishmael. But to me, I think the most interesting, and what I think what opens up to a theme that we can focus on now is the approach of the Rashbam. The Rashbam was Rashi's grandson, and anyone who's ever studied Rashbam, he's always looking to stick to the simplest explanation there is. He doesn't want to get drushy and bring him into Rushim and, and what lesson and what is this a parable for. He really wants to just stick to the simplest interpretation of the text. So what is the simplest interpretation of the text in this case? Well, let's look. What was the event that preceded the Akedah? Does anyone remember what was the event that preceded the Akedah? Exactly. It was the treaty that Abraham made with Avimelech. Okay, so if you look on the source sheet I gave you, source number 2. So this is what the Rashbam says. It's really, I think, kind of shocking. He says, here too, the words mean that what follows occurred after Avram and Avimelech had concluded their covenant, according to which, until the 4th generation, Avram's descendants would not register a claim against lands owned by the Plishtim at this time. God became very angry at this high-handed action by Abraham, seeing that he had given away lands which were part of what God had promised Avram and his descendants at the covenant of the pieces, the Brit Bein HaMitarim, in chapter 15. We know that a condition of that covenant had been not to allow a single soul of the Canaanites to survive in that land, according to Devarim and also to Sefer Yoshua. Clearly, lots had been cast concerning the lands owned by the 5 Plishtim rulers, and who was to settle in those lands after the conquest. As a result of Abraham's high-handed action, by Elohim, Nisa, and Abraham, Hashem now subjected Abraham to a painful test, something which was bound to cause him grief. In this instance, Hashem, so to speak, indicated to Abraham that he had been foolish to think that he could guarantee Yitzchak's and his descendants' well-being into the future, as he might have to terminate his life before he even had produced any offspring who would be called upon to honor his father's deal with Avimelech. In other words, what is Rashbam saying here? He's saying, if Abraham wants to make a treaty on behalf of himself, great, no problem. He has every right to do that. But to start making a treaty on behalf of the future generations, on behalf of his son and his grandsons and his great-grandsons and descendants beyond that, Hashem is saying, that's not his business. That's not his place, especially with territory that was promised to him that's going to stay with him. You can't leave that up for grabs and up for, and open up. And because, I believe what the Rashbam is saying, because Avram was so flippant and so careless about the future generations and about the well-being of his son by entering into this treaty, Hashem is saying, you know what? Let's see how much you appreciate your son now, right? If you really need to be concerned with the well-being of your son and his descendants, now I'm going to test you and see how concerned you are with the well-being of your son and his descendants. And what's so fascinating is that it almost looks like the Rashbam is giving Abraham a hard time and accusing him of not being so focused on his own family. Right? What was Abraham's mission in life? Abraham's mission in life was to transform the world, was to transform humanity. He wasn't he wasn't someone who stayed within his own clan. Abraham spoke to anyone, taught anyone. His house was open to anyone who came in. He really wanted to revolutionize the destiny of mankind. He taught monotheism, and it was a movement that took off. He was successful. I don't blame him for getting caught up in his success and wanting to literally change the world. But at whose expense? Right? At whose expense did that happen? And perhaps, I think what Rashbam was suggesting, it was at the expense of his own family. And Rashbam was not the first one to make this point. When going back to the story of Ishmael, when Sarah tells Abraham we need to send him away, so Rashi comments on that. The pasuk says that Abraham was very distressed over this. So if you're just reading that without commentary, you would assume it means he was distressed that this is my son who I love. I don't want to abandon him. I don't want to, excommunicate him from the family. And Rashi gives that as a second reason what he was distressed over. But Rashi's first reason what he was distressed over was that Ishmael had gotten so far gone from the values of his father. How could it be that Ishmael is worshiping idols and living immorally with women and trying to harm Yitzhak, all the things that the Medrash accuses him of doing? But what's the point Rashi is making here is that Avram didn't realize that until now? I mean, Ishmael was not a kid. Ishmael was at least 13 years old at this point in time, right? When Yitzhak was born, and maybe a little older, because Yitzhak had already gotten weaned at that point. So where was Abraham that he didn't see who Ishmael? Sarah saw it very clearly, and it wasn't even Sarah's biological child. She understood and she perceived the danger that Ishmael posed to the household. But maybe, right, maybe what the Medrash is suggesting, Abraham was paying too much attention to everybody else and not paying enough attention to his own family. Right? And that was the danger. And now Hashem says, here's a situation I'm creating where you're going to be forced, right, to pay attention to your own family. And it's so interesting the transformation that takes place, because all the stories of Abraham pre the Akedah are all about his dealings with with the rest of the world, with all the other nations, and the peace treaty he made with Abimelech, and entreating on behalf of Sodom, and he was very concerned about world, the world around him. After the Akedah, what do we know about Abraham? What does he do after the Akedah?
Get very wives.
First he marries Sarah, and then he's very focused on acquiring a wife for Yitzhak, right? And all of a sudden he becomes very focused inward on his own family, right? See, Abraham, it's fascinating. He impacted thousands and thousands, right? We talk about the souls that he made in Haran. He had a tremendous influence on the world. But what do we know about the legacy of any of those thousands of people? We don't know. How long did it last? How long were they monotheists? How long did they live a godly lifestyle? But whose legacy do we know about? That of Yitzhak. Right? That's the one that we know of. Yes?
There are almost two implied criticisms. One is that the leaders in general are at risk of neglecting their own families. We have that with Moshe. We have that with many leaders in Tanakh.
Absolutely.
And also, wouldn't it make sense if he was so vocal against Sodom that he should at least try to fight with Hashem?
So we'll talk about that in a moment. We'll talk about his, why he didn't speak up. But let's just finish this concept first, and I think that's true, and I think that's really one of the takeaway messages that we have, why the Akedah is such a pervasive theme to us, is that, especially this time of year when we are, the whole world is standing in judgment before God, and, we want everything to be good, and we want there to be peace, and we want, everyone to, accept God as king, and, we have all these lofty goals for humanity. We can't, at the same time, forget those who we have the biggest influence over, right? Our own families, our own children. We can't get so caught up with everything that we're doing outside the home and neglect what's supposed to be going on inside the home. Okay, that's point number one, or I should say message number one. Message number two, follow along here in the notes, is the second part of the pasuk where it says Elokim nisa et Abraham. Hashem tested Abraham. Right. So we know that Abraham had famously had 10 tests. Depending on which commentator you look at, there's a different counting or counting of those tests. Rashi, for example, will take some incidences that we know from the Medrash about Abraham and count that as one of his tests. Whereas the Rambam only sticks to what we see inside the text. So there may be a little bit of a disagreement on some of the lists of what his 10 tests were, but everybody has the Akedah on the list. Most people have it as the final test, the climactic test of Abraham on their list. And in fact, it's the only event that's actually called a test, right? It says that Elohim Nisa et Abraham. It's the only one that was actually called a test. So the question is, though, what does that mean Hashem tested him? So here, I'm a teacher, right? So when I give tests to my students, why am I giving them a test? Because I want to know how much they absorbed of the material that we studied, right? And it could be they were paying attention and taking notes and they bombed the test, and it could be I thought they were completely somewhere else and they aced the test. And the only way for me to know how well they've mastered the material is to actually give them a test so that I can find out where they're holding, right? So that works for people, right, who are not omniscient and who are not omnipotent, who don't know the outcome of things, right? But to say that God tested Abraham, what does that mean? Like Hashem knows who Abraham is, and Hashem knows what he's capable of, and he doesn't need to put him through a test to see, is he really committed to me or not? Hashem knows what the outcome of that is going to be before he ever undertakes it. So what is the point of the test then? If it's not for Hashem to know what Abraham is capable of, what's the point? Yes?
Well, for us, any tests we have in life, not just like as huge and significant as like a Yitzchak, but any test that we have in life, we really kind of have to see that Hashem, in his infinite way, is trying to draw us closer. It's not that he's trying to punish us or belittle us, but it's a very challenging thing to do. But I think like we have these paradigms in the Torah, and throughout our very difficult, long exile and history,
Right.
that everything is really, in a way, to draw us closer.
Okay, beautiful. So I mean, if I can spin off of that a little bit, there's really two major approaches amongst the Meforshim. What exactly was Hashem testing? What was the purpose of the test? So the first one is the Rambam. Look at source number 3 from the Moreh Nevuchim. And the Rambam and others spell this out. So the sole object of all the trials mentioned in Scripture is to teach man what he ought to do or believe, so that the event which forms the actual trial is not the end desired, but an example for our instruction guidance. Hence the words to know, ladat, whether you love. And he's quoting from the Akedah, right? To know whether Abraham loves God or not. Do not mean that God desires to know whether they love God, for he already knows it. But ladat, here he says to know, but I would translate it to make known. To make known has here the same meaning as the phrase, to make known that I am the Lord that sanctifies you. That all the nations shall know that I am the Lord who sanctifies you. In other words, who's the purpose of the test for? It's for everybody else. Right? Hashem knows that Abraham is dedicated and is going to follow through with this. But he wants to make a statement to the rest of humanity. Look how committed my servant is to me. Look how loyal he is. Look what dedication he has. Look what he's willing to give up on my behalf. So the Ibn Ezra wants to argue, but wait a second, nobody witnessed it. Right? Even the two people that went with Abraham to Har HaMoriah, he made them stay back, and it was just Abraham and Yitzchak on the mountain, right? But the Rambam will argue, but Hashem put it in the Torah, and we read it every year, and we read it on Rosh Hashanah, and we say it in our tefillah, right? It's something that it's meant to be publicized to, create what we would call a Kiddush Hashem, to show the extent of the loyalty that we owe to Hashem, and that Hashem gets from his people and from his followers. That's part one. The other approach, and I don't think they're mutually exclusive, is source number 4 on the back side of the page. And it's the Ramban. Oh, sorry, one point I forgot to mention, the Abravanel, when he's describing this word Nisa, that Hashem tested Abraham, so in Nes, in Hebrew, could also be a banner, right, or like a sign. So, it's very consistent with the approach of the Rambam that this is a sign, this is a billboard, in Times Square, so that everybody can see the commitment that Abraham has to God. The source number 4 is the Ramban. He looks at it a little bit differently. It says, and God tested Abraham. The issue of this test is, in my opinion, shows that a person has the absolute authority to perform an action. One can do what they want and not do what one doesn't want. It is called a nisayon, for the individual being tested. But the blessed tester, with a capital T, will command him to bring out the thing from ability to actuality, giving reward for a good action and not just a reward for a good heart. Know that Hashem tries the righteous. When he knows that a righteous person will act according to his will, but still seeks that person to act with their righteousness, he will command him to a test, but he does not test the wicked, since they would anyways not hear. And behold, every test in the Torah is for the good of the one being tested. Right? It was for Abraham. Abraham was committed to Hashem. Abraham lived a life committed to God and teaching those values to the rest of humanity. But how far was he willing to, put those values to the test, right? It's one thing we all think of, well, if we're in a situation, I know what I'd like to do, right? God forbid, 9/11, I don't know, pops into my head. We just had a whole, program about it here in school. Like, I'd love to think that if I were in that building, I would have helped people. I would have, done something I could, help someone down the stairs. But I don't know, if I was there, maybe I just would have jumped over everyone and tried to get myself out, right? We just don't know what our potential is or how we'll handle things until we are actually put to the test. So yes, Hashem knows what we're capable of, but for ourselves to know what, from what we think we would do to what we're actually able to do and willing to do, those are two very different things sometimes. And that says the Ramban and others is the purpose of testing Abraham. It's for the purpose of Abraham to know, right, that he can really see in action, in real time, the extent of his dedication to Hakadosh Baruch Hu. And I think that's really lesson 2 of the Akedah, is this idea that we are sometimes tested. And, really the challenge, I think, is that when we go through challenging situations, so this time of year, we talk about punishments and suffering to atone for our sins and, things that might happen to us, and we want to do tshuva so we can remove the need for punishments and things like that. See, the problem for us is we don't know when we're in a challenging situation if it's a punishment or if it's a test. Right? Clearly we see that both are possible. Abraham wasn't being punished, at least not according to these approaches. Maybe according to the Rashbam he was, but he wasn't being punished, he was just being tested, either to display to the world his dedication or to prove to himself the extent of his dedication. For us, I think we have to see any challenging situation that we're in from both perspectives. Right? If it's because we did something wrong, then we have an obligation to be introspective, which is what we're all doing this time of year, hopefully, to be introspective and to see what can I change and what can I fix and what can I correct and where are my flaws and where are my weaknesses and and to work on those so that yes, whatever punishment we have coming to us, Hashem can erase. But at the same time, if we can only do as much as we can do, and then at a certain point, if it's a test, we have to just accept that this is the will of God, and with how much dignity can we conduct ourselves through this test without hating God, without cursing God, without asking why, and our faith being shattered because of any test that we might be going through. And I think that's something to really keep in mind this time of year when we are being so introspective about these things, that maybe not everything bad that happens is because it's a punishment, but we have a responsibility to do what we can do, but at the same time to rise to the occasion if it is in fact a test, and acknowledge that maybe Hashem is just trying to prove to us the commitment, the level of commitment that we have. Okay, so I want to go back to Debbie's question that she had asked, and that is, why doesn't Abraham protest? Right? I mean, we know by Sodom, when Hashem said he's going to wipe out those cities, he had no problem complaining to God and saying it's not fair and it's not right, and 50 and 40 and 30 of the righteous people, will you wipe them all out? Right? He really stood his ground and negotiated, or at least attempted to negotiate with God. In this case, he had lots of reasons to argue to God that this is not a good idea to make me sacrifice my son. Right? First of all, who's going to take over? Here I am, championing your cause, God, throughout the world. And if this son is gone, you already made me send Ishmael away. So who's going to take over this legacy? All this work that we've done, it's going to disappear. It's going to dissipate because there's no one to take it over. And then on top of that, he could have argued to God, listen, God, here I spent all this time teaching people and preaching to people what a kind God you are, and merciful God you are, and what a just God you are, and and now we're going to talk about child sacrifice. Like that's totally going to undo all the good work that we've done if you make me go through and do this. Right? There's so many arguments that Abraham legitimately could have come up with. But if you look at the Psukim, if you go back to the first page, we don't have to read them inside. I don't have time to finish up, but there's nothing that he says. There's nothing that he, it seems like he just blindly accepts and moves on and commits to this. So the Medrash, which is in source number 5, what time do we finish?
12:30.
12:30. Okay, so we have more time. I'm thinking 12:15. We're good. Okay. So the Medrash, and it's so beautiful. I mean, the Medrash does this in several places, but it sort of goes into the mind of Abraham, right? The Medrash is saying, don't think Abraham just did this blindly, that he, didn't have all of these arguments that we could so easily come up with. Clearly in his head, he definitely knew, there was something wrong with this. And the Medrash spells it out so beautifully. Let's look what it says inside. It says, Satan appeared before him on the road, and the guide him an old man, right? He's on his way, and asked him, where are you going? Abram replied, to pray. And why? Satan retorted. Does one go to pray carrying fire and a knife in his hands and wood on his shoulders? So we may tarry there for several days, said Abraham, and slaughter an animal and cook it, right? He's giving excuses why, because again, the Satan isn't necessarily a little devil with horns that meets him on the road, but it's in his own mind, right? It's the demons in his own mind that are speaking to him and trying to talk him out of this. So the old man responded, this is not so. I was present when the Holy One, blessed be he, ordered you to take your son. Why should an old man who begets a son at the age of 100 destroy him? Have you not heard the parable of the man who destroyed his own possessions and then was forced to beg from others? If you believe that you will have another son, you are listening to the words of a seducer. And furthermore, if you destroy a soul, you will be held legally accountable for it. Abram answered, it was not a seducer, but the Holy One, blessed be he, who told me what I must do, and I shall not listen to you. But you can hear, the beauty of the Medrash, you can hear Abram wrestling with his own doubts, right? He doesn't verbalize them, but he's wrestling with his own doubts. The Satan is giving voice to what's spinning around in his head. And it goes on. On the third day, Abram lifted up his eyes. Since the distance was extremely short, what delayed them 3 days? When Satan realized that they would not pay attention to him, he went ahead and created a river in their path. When Abram stepped into the river, it reached his knees. He ordered his young men to follow him, and they did so. But in the middle of the river, the water reached his neck. Thereupon Abram lifted his eyes heavenward and cried out, Master of the universe, you have chosen me. You have instructed me. You revealed yourself to me. You have declared, I am one and you are one, and through you shall my name be made known in my world. You have ordered me. Offer Isaac your son as a sacrifice, and I did not refuse. But now, as I'm about to fulfill your command, these waters endanger my life. If either I or my son gets out to drown, who will fulfill your decrees? Who will proclaim the unity of your name? The Holy One, blessed be he, responded, be assured that through you, the unity of my name will be made known throughout the world. Thereupon the Holy One, blessed be he, rebuked the source of the water, caused the river to dry up, and once again they stood on dry land. See, what's the point of this Medrash? Abram had a legitimate excuse to stop. He had a legitimate excuse. Okay, there's water. I can't cross it. I don't have a boat. There's no bridge. It's too deep. Sorry, I'm going to go back. Right? But once Abraham had committed, you see in his tefillah to God, asking him to let us keep going through, he was committed. He wanted the opportunity to do what God had asked him. He had so resolved it in his mind that this was the right thing to do that nothing was going to stop him, right? And it distressed him that something might stop him along the way. Yes?
I have a question. Not Avraham Avinu on that level, but just an ordinary person that's going through a test. So how does one discern between, let's say, Higiu Mayim Ad Nafesh, right? Similar to the Kriyas Yamsu. So, according to, if you want to do really Ritzon Hashem, so figuratively, let's say like Higiu Mayim Ad Nafesh, whatever that means. Let's say you want to get to do a mitzvah and you're stuck in 3 hours of traffic. You want to get to the Beit HaMikdash and the road is closed, whatever it is, right? So how does
So this is the message that Abraham sets the example. You ask Hashem for help.
No, but
in this case, Hashem helped him. In our case, he may not have cleared the traffic.
I hear you. But what
right.
point can you say? It's also like the. Do you say like this is the Satan, or do you say this I did? Yagati, vasiti et sheli, like I did as much as I could.
Right.
It's it's Hashem's will that this not be done right now.
I mean, so
Like,
that's
that's very a fine line,
That's
right?
everybody on their level. That's everybody on their level. What can I tell you? I mean, we're obviously looking at the paradigm here.
Right.
We're looking at Abraham, who
Right.
was the penultimate,
Uh-huh.
sacrifice and person being tested. So, if we can follow his example and, to the extent that we're able to follow through with something, and ask Hashem for help and show, I think the point is the demonstration,
Mhm.
that we're showing Hashem we want to be able to persevere and make this happen. But then to a certain extent it's in God's hands, if we can or if we can't.
So is that like a b'diavad? If you say, okay, I tried, maybe I didn't try hard enough to a mitzvah or
It depends on the case. Like in the case of traffic, there's not much else I can do. You know what I'm saying? If Hashem doesn't clear it, then I can't.
Right.
I can't. It's the same thing with Avram. If Hashem didn't make the river go away, he
Right.
wouldn't have been able to do it. I think the point of the measure is not so much that the river was there, but that Avram was so committed to his task that he was distressed that he couldn't fulfill it. Even though this was such a perfect excuse to say, sorry, because clearly he was distressed in having to fulfill that task too. And that's the whole first part of the medrash. It was going through his mind, and he had to wrestle with that. But once he concluded that this is the right thing to do, and this is what Hashem is demanding of me, then he didn't want anything to stop him.
Right. Isn't there a concept also like if you really have proper intention, the Shem Shamayim, that you're going to do a mitzvah, that you're going to help a person, you're going to give tzedakah, and then like you just don't have that money to give them, or whatever it is.
Right. I think intentions count a lot. Absolutely.
It can sound like.
I think when we get to the concluding section, I think we'll deal with what you're. No, I think we will elaborate on your point a little more strongly. I'm glad that you're bringing it up. But see, what's the point? Is that here Avram was willing to do this. Not only willing to, but once he made the commitment, he wanted nothing to stop him. Right? That he was willing to make the ultimate sacrifice for Hashem. And the reality is that this story of the Akedah has always been held up as the penultimate role model for one who has to sacrifice. I mean, in his case, it was his child. In other cases, we know there have been generations where Jews have been asked to give up their lives. There's a beautiful, very haunting Gemara in Gittin where it talks about Hannah, the Hanukkah story. And we know the story of her 7 sons. And as each son was being killed, she made a statement that Abraham had 1 Akedah. She goes, I have 7. And then she killed herself because she couldn't live with the pain of losing all those children. But that's what she looked to. If I could take just a moment, I want to read you an excerpt from a book. So I don't know if anyone's ever seen this before. The Forgotten Memoirs. It was written by a historian, Esther Farbstein. She lives in Israel. And what she did was she went through different Sfarim from great Gedolim, who were all survivors of the Holocaust. And in a lot of them, the introductions to their Sfarim, which are halachic works, they tell their stories of what they went through, what they experienced in the camps. So there's a fascinating story in here by Rabbi Tzvi Hirsch Meisels. He was from Hungary and was deported to Auschwitz, I think, in 1944. His wife and 7 of his children were killed. I think 3 of his children survived with him. And he sort of became the Rav of the camp. That was, they knew that there was a rabbi there, so anyone who had questions, they came to him. So listen to this. This is heart-wrenching. He says, I was approached by an inmate who appeared to be a simple Oberlander Jew. From the sincere, innocent words, he said, Rabbi, my only son, the apple of my eye, is among those boys condemned to be burned. Sorry, a little background. It was on Rosh Hashanah, and the Nazis decided as a celebration of the Jewish New Year, they were going to kill 1,400 boys, 1,400 children. And the way they did it, they set up like when you're going to ride a roller coaster, you have to be this tall to go on the ride. So they set up a board. And they said anyone who's taller than the board will survive, and anyone who's too short, they're on the list. And there were 1,400, and they had an exact count, right? They had a quota of how many boys they were going to kill. So he says, my only son, the apple of my eye, is among those boys condemned to be burned. I have enough to ransom him, but since I know that the Kapos will seize someone else in his place, I am asking you, Rabbi, a practical halachic question. Please give me a ruling in accordance with the Torah. Am I allowed to ransom my son? I will do whatever you say. When I heard this question, I was seized by trembling at the thought of ruling on a matter of life or death. I replied, my dear friend, how can I render halachic judgment on this question? Even when the temple stood, such a life or death question would have been posed to the Sanhedrin. And here I am in Auschwitz without a single halachic text for reference, without other rabbis with whom I can consult. I do not have the peace of mind that is required to render judgment due to the great hardships and troubles that plague us. And then he goes on, this is not what he's saying to the gentleman, but this is the process that's going through his mind. If the evil kapos were to release the child in exchange for money, and only then look for someone else to replace the first child, then there might be room to find reason to allow the ransom. Why? Because we could say that the kapos are still Jews, and they are certainly forbidden to endanger another child when he was not consigned to death from the onset. This is the principle of let him be killed rather than transgress. So we could hypothesize that perhaps the kapo would not seize another boy to take the place of the first one, because perhaps his Jewish soul would be aroused and prevent him from committing such a grave prohibition. So in other words, it wouldn't be a sure thing that if he took his son, ransomed his son, that another one would be in his place. We could say that in the end, their Jewish hearts would not allow them to commit such a severe transgression. But to my great sorrow, I have seen that the kapos first seize another soul from the camp, and only then do they release the ransom one. They do this to make absolutely sure they will not come up short in the required number of victims assigned to them by the SS. They release the ransomed child and are then not able to seize another victim in his place. They will pay the penalty when the SS discover that they are missing someone. Therefore, this conjecture does not help me at all in trying to permit this. The man burst out in tears and begged me repeatedly to give me an answer. He said, Rabbi, you must give me a clear ruling, because the question burns within me whether I can save my only son while it is still possible. I, on the other hand, implored him, my dear friend, please, leave me alone regarding this question. I cannot tell you anything here in such appalling circumstances without looking in the book. But he persisted, saying, Rabbi, I see that you cannot permit me to ransom my only son, so the answer must be no. I accept this judgment with love. I protested his words, telling him, my dear Jew, I did not say that I forbid you from ransoming your son. I do not rule one way or another. Do as you wish as if you hadn't asked me. Rebbe, I do what the Torah requires me to do. I asked a rabbi, and there is no other rabbi here but you. If you cannot tell me outright that I am permitted to ransom my son, it is a sign that you are not sure whether the halacha allows me to do so. Because if it were possible beyond doubt, you would surely tell me so. So I understand this to mean that the halachic judgment is that it is forbidden according to Jewish law. I accept this verdict with love and joy. I will not do anything to remove him from the group, because that is what the Torah wants. None of my words made a difference. I told him not to place the responsibility on me, that he should make up his mind as if I had never heard the question. But that only caused him to redouble his efforts to repeat himself. He poured out his heart, and he did not ransom his son. That day was Rosh Hashanah, and he walked around all day, talking to himself happily about how he had merited sacrificing his only son to Hashem. He said that he had not ransomed his son, even though he had the opportunity to do so, because he saw that the Torah did not permit him to do so. He prayed that his action should be considered by Hashem as the binding of Isaac, our forefather, that likewise took place on Rosh Hashanah. I mean, it's such a powerful story. Such a powerful story. But what's the point? See, and here's really the thought that I want to leave you with. That is that, yes, the Akedah and the willingness to sacrifice was something that's held up, and very tragically, there have been Jews in situations where that has to have been a role model for us, because there's no other way that anyone could do such a thing if we didn't have that role model about making that sacrifice. But the reality is, those are very rare cases. Thank God, right? Thank God. I mean, we hear the stories of those situations, but they were rare. Over the course of Jewish history, most of us have not been in a situation where we had to give up our lives in sacrifice. So, while on the one hand, the Akedah serves as a role model for that, on the other hand, for the rest of us, what do we look to the Akedah as? What really was the message? Because in the end, Abraham didn't have to kill his son, right? Hashem stopped him, and Hashem said, "Here, take the ram in its place. It's not your child that I want you to kill." So, what was the message? What was the legacy that Abraham was conveying there? So the fact that he was committed to take his child, who he loved, who he waited 100 years for, who represented is linked to all future generations, and say, this child is not mine, but belongs to God, and if Hashem wants him, then I have no choice but to give him back. I think of the story of Rabbi Meir and Beria, right? The story of Beria, where tragically their two sons died, and she waits for him to come home, and he makes Abdullah, and he uses Malava Malka, and only then she asks him a shayla, right? The shayla is, somebody lent me some jewels, right? And now they've come back and asked for them back. What's the malacha? Am I required to return them or not? And he says, of course, they're not yours, and you're just borrowing them, then you have to return them, right? And that's when she brings him to see the two dead children. And, aside from his grief, she says to him, didn't you just tell me that if someone lends us something, we have to give it back when we're asked? Right? That was the true acknowledgement that our children, which are so much a part of ourselves, are really just on loan from Hashem. Maybe, another example, again, we read in the Haftarah the other day, the story of Hannah. She names her son Shmuel. Why? Because Kime Hashem Sha'alti, because he is loaned to me from God. Right? She sees Shmuel not as the fulfillment of her maternal instincts and an opportunity for her to shower her love and her nurturing on someone. She raises Shmuel to give back to God, to be a servant of the Jewish people, because she sees it's not mine. He's on loan to me from God, and now I have to make sure that he's used in the service of God. Right? I think that's the ultimate message of the Akedah. The Rebbe spells it out very beautifully. We'll read it inside in a moment. But the ultimate message is that everything we have, our children are probably the greatest example because they are so much a part of us that we think that they are ours. But our time, our IQ, our talent, our possessions, our money, our home, right? Everything that we have to view it as it really belongs to Hashem, and it's on loan to us. And if Hashem wants us to use it in His service, right? That's what Abraham was teaching us, that whatever we have really belongs to God. And when we stand in front of Hashem, and we, especially coming up with Yom Kippur when we do the Vidoy, and all the things that we did wrong, did we really use everything that Hashem gave us, all the talents and assets and abilities and health and time that He gave us? Did we all use it in the service of Hashem? I can't speak for anyone in the room. I can certainly say I did not. I did not, and that's something we have to change and work on and fix. But again, that is the message of the Akedah, that our job as Jews is to live a life of sacrifice, sacrificing what Hashem has given us back in His service. Just take a look finally, source number 6, what the Rebbe says. Because Abraham implemented the sacrifice of Isaac, not on Mount Moriah, but in the depths of his heart. He gave up Isaac the very instant God addressed Himself to him and asked him to return his most precious possession to its legitimate master and owner. Immediately, with no arguing or pleading, Abraham surrendered Isaac. Abraham at that moment experienced the horror, desolation, and black despair of the childless father who has no one to whom he can entrust his most cherished treasure. His vision and hope, and who knows that everything for which he has worked will die with him. Nevertheless, he did not argue. He proceeded to Mount Moriah. When he arrived there, the sacrifice was a fait accompli. In Avram's mind, there was no Isaac, no beloved son, no heir to his spiritual fortune. Avram came alone, forsaken and forgotten. Isaac's flesh was already consumed by the fires on the altar and had gone up in a pillar of smoke to heaven. There was no need for the physical sacrifice, since experientially, Avram had fulfilled the command before he reached Mount Moriah. All God asked of Avram at that point was a substitute sacrifice, and Avram offered the ram up as a burnt offering instead of his son. See, again, the idea there is, if in our minds and if in our orientation and what drives us in our whole perspective and attitude is that everything we have is on loan from Hashem, it's a gift to us to use in His service, to be sacrificed in His service, to be elevated in His service, then we are following the example of Abraham. And there's a beautiful quote from Rabbi Eliezer of Rokeach. One second, I wrote his name down. He lived in the time of the Crusade. He lost a wife and child in the Crusades. And at his surviving son's bar mitzvah, Rabbi Eliezer Rokeach, at his surviving son's bar mitzvah, he got up and he gave a very moving speech where he said, we've had the experience where we've had to die for God. He goes, but now, the Crusades are over. Now our challenge is to live for God, right? To take everything that we have and to use it in God's service. And, here we are, Zachreinu l'chaim, melachafetz b'chaim, v'kasveinu b'sefer achayim, l'mancha Elohim chayim. This is the time of year that we beg and we plead and we implore for a good life, a long life, a happy life, a peaceful life, a healthy life, right? Everything that we hope and aspire to for the coming year, for ourselves, for our loved ones, for Klal Yisrael. And, when we think about living, right, what does that mean? What does that imply? It is the message of the Akedah, it's the sacrificial life. It's the idea that we take everything that we have. The Rebbe said it very beautifully. He says, if the Jew doesn't know sacrifice, he doesn't know Judaism, right? That's our purpose. That is our mission, is to take the most precious things that Hashem gave us and recognize that they don't belong to us, but they belong to God. And that, I think, is the ultimate message of the Akedah. And with that, I wish everyone Shana Tova, Tzika V'Chasina Tova. And thank you again for coming out this morning. Really appreciate it.